Welcome to another episode in the M&A in the Trade series. In episode 2, we talked about what executives at first-time platform companies can do to get acquisition ready and the challenges that come with it. And one key takeaway was to capture growth synergies and not just think about cutting costs. And one of the key players to be able to capture all the synergies you've planned for is having a savvy CFO on board to help you in your M&A strategy end to end. So in this episode, I'm excited to dive into the world of the CFO at private equity companies so you are able to actualize the synergy targets that you and your board have set. And to do that, I've got some amazing folks with me today. As always, my co-host, Gyner 𝗧𝗜𝗠𝗘𝗦𝗧𝗔𝗠𝗣𝗦 CEO at Perimeter Roofing and board advisor at Origo. And we have a very special guest today, Jeff Johnson, a three-time CFO at private equity platform. Jeff, welcome to the show. We're excited to have you.
Well, thank you. I'm excited to be here as well.
Beautiful. And Gyner, as always, you add a ton of value to this podcast. I'm just grateful for our partnership to put out some amazing content and contribute to the world of private equity.
Thanks, Yassine, as always. And Jeff and I know each other. We actually had the privilege of working together for a number of years. So I bow to Jeff. We had a great experience together. And what I would say, and we'll talk more later. Jeff was one of those CFOs that navigated a really difficult environment when we went through COVID. And he won't take credit for that. But there was a lot of architecture that Jeff had to put in place. So, Jeff will always have my respect for the way he thought about the business and what he did for the business during a really tough time.
Absolutely. And I also had the honor and pleasure to work with Jeff when he was in previous roles. And he had definitely set us up for success. And now I get the chance to also to partner yet again with Jeff on a new exciting journey. So, Jeff, before I spill all the beans, why don't you give us a quick background about your experience in private equity as a CFO at private equity platforms doing M&A?
Sure, happy to do that. And first thing I would say is I think both of you guys are a little bit too exaggerative of my abilities, but I appreciate that. Thank you. So my background right now, I am CFO Environmatic Solutions. We're a private equity based company in the controls integration space. Previously, I was with a couple of other private equity firms, portfolio companies. Before that, I've also been in a variety of public and private organizations throughout my career as a CFO, and prior to that as controller. So I've got a large background in a variety of organizations in addition to private equity, which I bring up because I think it's actually helpful in the private equity space. And as far as M&A goes, that's been a key piece of my background in many of the companies I've helped to nurture, either growing through acquisition or consolidating through acquisition, and then also some mergers and divestitures through that process as well.
Yeah, brilliant. So, and one of the key things, Jeff, I'm really keen to dive into is you've been, the first CFO when a platform got acquired and they're getting acquisition ready. So I'm wondering, when you come in as a CFO at a new private equity platform, what does your 90-day plan look like? What are some of your priorities and goals?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think Gyner will back me up on this one. Everything you do ends up being about people, and it's about the team. And so for the first 90 days, you're and it sounds a little trite to say you're trying to assess the team, but it's not just your team. It's you have to lead by influence. You need to understand how the business is going, how the business is working, and that's all about the leaders who are there. It's about the team who is there and how they're operating. And if you think about the first 90 days, usually when I join, especially as a CFO, I probably don't know the industry as well as anybody else in the organization. They all know it better than me. So the first thing I need to do is I need to get from them what really makes a business special. Every business
Mm,
has something that is making it successful, and trying to
mm,
understand what that is for two reasons. One, I want to be able to amplify that. Whatever's making
mm,
it good, I want to be able to amplify it, measure it, help the team to be successful, and also to make sure I don't trip up and do something that's gonna harm the company.
One thing before the first 90 days, the CFO, in Jeff's case, because I've worked with Jeff, but for me, and I learned this from Jeff, actually, I should say, that there's an important piece before 90 days that the CFO also does, which is ground the
mm.
business in the acquisition that it's actually buying, right? Like it all looks good on paper until the CFO looks at it and says, okay, let's really have a discussion about how this is going to work post close, right?
Mm.
So maybe Jeff, like, what's your experience in the upstream of the acquisition itself, and what have you seen in those acquisitions, and maybe where do we trip ourselves up sometimes?
Mm. Great question.
You know, that's a great question, and this is going to sound like the wrong answer coming from the CFO. But because people will look at the numbers till till the cows come home.
Mm,
But the real question is who's going to run the business? Who's your
mm,
lead? Because if you don't have a leader in place or the right leaders in place, that business will implode. You'll lose all of your employees.
mm,
And then what is making it special? So if you're a service organization, guess what? It's all about people. And
mm,
it's funny when you look at a P&L, you'll often see that the general ledger will have all sorts of different accounts. How much did I spend on subscriptions, and how much did I spend on hotels, and how much did I spend on coffee? And then they got
mm.
one line that says payroll. It's like, well, wait a minute. That's it? What about the payroll is important? What about my employees that are important? So upstream, it really is about who's going to lead the business and how and what makes it successful. And especially if I'm buying it and integrating it into another business, I could break that really quickly
Mm,
because they have been successful for some reason, and it's usually about the people. And usually, if it's about the people, it's a unique process and structure. So how do you adapt that, and how do you not lose that?
mm,
Jeff,
so-
Jeff, let me ask you a question about the people,
mm,
um, because I remember some of our spirited
Mhm.
conversations when we were doing some M&A stuff. Um, when do you feel it's necessary to push back sometimes when people become part of the thesis of the, oh, you're buying this business and you really don't need that person.
mm,
But you said some things about what makes a business special and the people, like, because I remember our conversations where we push on that a little bit and say, really, is that really true, or do we really need this person, right?
mm,
Like, let's this person might be working 20 hours a week, but they're really important to the culture of the business. Like,
mm,
how do you push on that, right?
Yeah, it's really interesting because it's a tough one. You're right. We have had a lot of spirited conversations, and it's a tough one because, well, I'll use a small example here internally. We have one individual who, someone was just asked the other day, what do they do? And the answer was they do everything. They're kind of the heartbeat of the organization. And if you say, well, how did something get done? It's well because this guy did it.
mm,
And I think it's particularly true when you have, well, the two pieces, anything that's customer facing.
mm,
I think it's really easy to downplay the impact of those people.
mm,
And even so especially if you're in the M&A world, and the one you often get is the owner who's sitting back going, I don't do anything. Well, he
mm.
may not do anything except for have the deep customer relationships that have been there for 10 years, and they
Yeah.
walk away,
Mm,
and so do the customers, or they walk away and so do the employees.
hmm.
And it's, Gyner, there's no man. I think the best way to have it is have the spirited conversations, to be honest with you. I think the worst answer is when everybody sits in the room and agrees that this is the right answer and you all move forward. I usually walk out of those rooms going, there's something wrong here. If we all think that someone's not being honest with us if we're all thinking we're agreeing on this. And the other thing is, to be fair, I think the back office folks are the ones that are the easiest to replace.
Mm.
Um,
In what way?
well, not that you got to be careful because they can have a very strong cultural influence, and change can also have a big change. But the guys who are actually on the ground executing whatever the business happens to be, service business, or if it's in a manufacturing business, um, what they do day in and day out has a significant impact on the quality that hits the customer.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes you can measure it, sometimes you can't. Tends to be less so when you're talking about someone who's in accounting or in HR or in IT. Now, that's where it gets a little bit dangerous, because all of a sudden you realize that you had someone in that organization that was a big piece of the culture, and you just lopped it off. But it's you're more likely to recover from that than you are to recover from someone who's actually been executing on delivering good quality customer service or delivering good customer relations.
And what's your process to doing this assessment or due diligence? Is it just like a gut feel, or is it like, do you have like a checklist, like a process? You interview everyone, like do you interview the key executive? Like, what's your process?
There's a T-shirt I saw running around the other day. It said there are two kinds of people: those who can extrapolate from limited information. And I think the process is a little bit like that. You're not gonna. Can you interview everybody? No, but what you have to do is get as deep into understanding the culture of the business as you can. The more of the leadership you can get to meet and get to talk to, get to ask them what the key drivers are in the business. I just told you that the general ledger didn't really help you. It told you how much you spent on subscriptions and that you had one payroll line. But what's really, who are the people that's driving the profit? How are they doing that? Who's creating good customer service? Who's creating poor customer service? And hearing what the leaders have to say about that can be very insightful.
Jeff,
yeah,
the only thing I would add, Jeff, is you got to be willing to sit in the passenger seat of all these roles, right? Which a lot of people don't want to do, right? So if you're in a service business, you got to get in the van and really understand the business, right?
I love that.
If you want to sit in the back office and really understand the value of what they do or don't do, you got to sit in the chair and really understand it, right? Because it's really easy. To me, the biggest mistake we all make, myself included, because I've made this mistake, is we don't really know. We assume that our history and our experience means, hey, this must be the right answer. And instead, really the right answer is go sit down with those roles, understand the business itself, and then take your history and experience and layer it on top of it and say, okay, what's the new right answer for this business, right? And I think that, for me, that was my epiphany. Like, oh, wow, I ran a $50 million supply chain, so this is how parts work, right? Until you buy a business that parts work different in. And you got to sit there and you got to sit with the parts person in the warehouse and see how they work it and say, oh, some of the things I've learned can apply here, but some can't because these guys are doing something different than we used to do. I think leaders lose sight of that. And that's where, you're buying a business. Jeff will tell you, he's a CFO. We're buying EBITDA at the end of the day, right? And the first time we make a cultural mistake, to Jeff's point, it just costs us EBITDA in that business. That's what it is. There's a real P&L impact, right? That's why it's important, to Jeff's point, that really understanding culture, really understanding what they do, and being very sensitive to that, especially early on, is really important.
I love that.
Yeah, and you had said the first 90 days, what do you do? And that's exactly what Gyner was talking about, because you don't know. Don't know what the warehouse guy is doing. You don't know what the person who is the clerk or out on the site. I don't know how you can understand a business without doing that right along, from all aspects of it. And it's easy not to. I agree.
And is there like a playbook, or is it really like every acquisition requires a different approach? Is there like a go-to playbook that you execute on in evaluating the people organization post-acquisition?
I'm going to let Gyner answer after I've had a chance to say something first on this. For me, I think it is the playbook is about asking a lot of questions, because you need to fundamentally understand whoever you're talking to, what their job is and what they think is making the business successful. And you're not going to get that without asking a lot of questions and being very humble as far as listening to the answers. And I'll tell you, one of my big failings is I leap pretty quickly. One of my strengths is I can see where things are going, but that's one of my weaknesses, because then when I'm having these conversations, I'll often say, "Oh, so you do this," and the answer is I shouldn't. Jeff, just keep your mouth
Right.
shut. What they have to say, and you will learn a lot.
Right.
And I think some of the playbook is just that. You go in with the expectation that they know what they're talking about, and you listen very closely, because that also gains trust. So if you do go back in and you look at Gyner's example where he goes, "Yeah, I could apply some things and other things I learned."
Hmm.
It'll be a lot more helpful when you go back, if you've listened and thought about it, to come back and say, "Hey, been thinking about this. Here's the things I think we can apply and maybe improve." And it's not saying what you're doing is wrong. It's saying, here's how we can together make a better process, product, whatever it happens to be.
Jeff, that's like perfectly stated. I'd say that the way I view the playbook is an evolution of almost every integration we do, right? And you learn something, and that playbook gets bigger, and you get more plays, right? You don't pull them all on every acquisition. You don't call all the plays on every acquisition. You may have 100 plays and call 30 of them because you only need 30 of them for that particular acquisition, right?
I love
And
that.
the other 70 for a combination of reasons aren't needed, right? And maybe all of a sudden your 100 just become 101 because, to Jeff's point, you learned something you didn't know about this business, and now you just added a new play that you didn't need before, right?
So
And
it's agile and iterative.
it is agile and iterative, and sometimes what you learn in the playbook is on the third or fourth acquisition you learn something new that then you go in reverse on the first three, and you go apply something new that you learned, right? And you say, there's something new I learned with this one. I can go to 1, 2, and 3 and do that too and be successful there, right?
But how do you reconcile with the model that you started with? I mean, I suppose, Jeff, before you made that acquisition decision, you built a spreadsheet model with all of these synergies and all of these, costs you're going to cut and all of these growth synergies you're going to capture and the EBITDA improvement. So you've done a lot of work ahead that you've modeled. Or maybe let me ask you, what do you model? What are the things that you look at pre-acquisition, and how do you reconcile with that post-acquisition as you start digging into the business and talking to the people?
So the model, it's interesting because you're right. You do the model. Now, the cost side of it, in some ways, it's almost too easy to execute on the cost side. Because the cost side says, I'm going to take 3 people out, and okay, those are the 3 people. You line them up and they're out the door. The challenge you get in the cost side in particular is, what are the unintended consequences of that? Which is why that first step isn't just about going and executing against the model necessarily. It's like making sure on the cost side of it, that I don't have an unintended consequence and I've got a huge issue that created a hole. On the growth side of it, it's just the opposite. Growth is hard. And growth is, people are going to drive growth. So I need to understand how I'm going to drive that growth. But to Gyner's point on it's iterative. I mean, there are tips or things that you start to learn that you bring. I still remember, and some of them you learn with the failures. Like, and we had a colleague who used to say this, and it was spot on. It took me several acquisitions to figure out how right he was. That at the end of the day, especially in a service organization, you want the employees on the end of day one to go back to their significant other at home and say, today was a good day and here was why.
Yeah.
And of course, most people forget about that. They think about, it's the first day of an acquisition. We need to make sure we get all the paperwork done, and we need to tell them to do this, and we need to tell them to do that, and we need to tell them to do that, and they walk away scared. And of course, you've just taken the asset you bought, which was a service organization, it's people, and you scared them on the end of day one. And, in his view was, you don't want to scare them. You want to give them a reason to go back and say it was a great day.
Yeah.
Okay. And, and there are other things along those lines that you start to learn as you go through this, so that you want to try to apply.
Yeah. Jeff, very sage the way you said that. I think the other thing is, and Jeff, maybe you could tell me if you disagree with this. I think there is a little bit of a misunderstanding in how we model acquisitions.
Mm.
People seem to think we model them in with synergies. We look at potential synergies as upside,
Mm.
but what we're buying is what we're buying, right? So
Mm.
if we're a $1 million EBITDA business, we're paying a multiple on that $1 million of EBITDA. We're not paying a multiple of a million plus whatever synergies we put in and saying, oh, look,
Mhm.
on day one, we'll get this, right? We buy it as is, and then we look for opportunities, and then we go through that almost as a checklist to say, hey, can we really do this afterwards? No, we can't. Good. Cross it off the list, move on to the next thing, right?
Mm.
I think people think that, and this is a little bit of what I'll call misunderstanding of private equity in general, because this has not been my experience. We don't go buy acquisitions and say, hey, we're going to go generate $100,000 of EBITDA on day one by just cutting a bunch of stuff,
Mm.
right? It's not how at least it's not how I've been thinking about it in our acquisitions. It's we're buying what we're buying. What is the potential upside of we're buying? And then after close, you say, okay, how much of that can I really go deliver, right? And if it means you can deliver $1 of it, but the EBITDA you bought stays the EBITDA you bought, and you go grow the organic side of the business and you improve the EBITDA that way, that's fine too. That's an okay answer. There's nothing wrong with that answer. I just think there's a mystique that because of the maybe bigger private equity deals you see in the news, where company A is buying company B, and there's a whole bunch of synergies because you have a huge executive team and you don't need two CEOs. Everyone seems to think that that's how all of them happen, and most of the acquisitions that happen in private equity are smaller businesses, 10 to 30 million in revenue, and we don't think of synergies that way. At least I don't. So Jeff, if I'm wrong or if you
No,
see
I think
opportunity,
you're right because, and I think your example of the big companies is a great example because I have been in organizations where I did assume synergies, but they tended to be what you just described, which is I have two big executive teams that sit in an ivory tower. But most of the PE world tends to be, I'm going to call it, they're doers. I mean, there's no one in the organization just sitting around and just sitting around making decisions. And then if I got two people sitting around making decisions, I only need
Mm.
one. That's rarely how it happens. And I would say one of the roles of a good pre-acquisition work is
Mm.
coming up with um, alternatives and opportunities.
Mm.
Here you use the word checklist, which is a great one. It's like, here are some things we think we may be able to do. We could
Mm.
grow it if we did these things. We might be able to save some costs if we did these things. And you want those numbers to be pretty hefty because then as you go through and do it, you can look at it and say, yeah, I thought maybe we could save some costs here, but that's not going to work. That's a bad idea. I
Mm.
thought we could grow the business here. Oh, that's not going to work. But over here, we can. And you kind
yeah,
of go through your list saying, what are the things that will make sense and what are the things that don't make sense? And usually, especially in the lower middle market PE world, it tends to be more about growth. I mean,
yes,
Mm.
if you think about most owner-run businesses, they're not sitting around with lots of dead weight, dead weight sitting there
Mm.
waiting to trimmed away. Everybody's doing something. And so if you think you're going to get rid of someone and not have to pick up that work, that's not. Usually it's the other way around. Actually, most of the companies I've been involved with from a portfolio company have to assume investment in infrastructure because in order
Mm.
to bring on acquisitions, you need a scalable back office, which
Mm.
usually means more than one person kind of doing things by hand. You need to put a system in place, you need to put process in place, and often that's going to cost some money. And so some of the pre-acquisition work is, well, how much do I need to spend to make this a scalable
I
platform?
love that. So since you talked about scalable infrastructure, what are the things as a CFO, Jeff, you need to get ready from an infrastructure perspective, and talk, people, process, technology, data. So if we look at these different variables, what are how are you thinking about integration, and what do you need to get ready for a successful integration strategy for the next 10 acquisitions?
Right. Well, I think you've got it right. Those are the processes. What I would so I'll be more pedantic than that, I guess. So I'm going to bring them on board. I need to think about my payroll. So how am I going to bring them into
Mm.
one payroll? How am I going to bring them onto one? healthcare system, one set of benefits. But at the same time, I got to be very thoughtful about that. If I'm buying people, these are the things that matter to people. So I need a scalable process that's going to be appropriate for the business I want to be as I get bigger, not just appropriate for the smaller business. I need to have an accounting infrastructure that can provide performance KPIs as well as consolidate my books and provide my investors with the results they want. And if you think about it, that's usually a structure that doesn't exist with an owner operator. So I need to do that. I need to set myself up to have the right level of data and KPIs moving forward. What's my customer structure look like? Who do I sell to? How much is recurring? What's the profitability of those? Because new owners in the PE world want to know that. And so I need to create all of that. And I would argue that one of the challenges with doing all of that is it's really easy to go down the path of too much complexity. And folks, you say, what do I need in to do any of those things I just mentioned? And everyone will tell you how many ponies and unicorns they want. And then you'll get some consultant or someone on your team who goes out and creates that. But it's so complex that you've just made it difficult to put a new business on that looks slightly different. You makes it too complex to make changes. And so making sure that your scalable process is simple is really important. If I think about an acquisition just from an accounting perspective, if I can take most businesses, what's important? I need to know who I pay, who's going to pay me, so my customers, my vendors, and then I probably have some historical GL information, and that's about it. So how can I take that relatively easily and put it into my historical information, because I will need that, into my current ERP or accounting system so I can continue to bill and provide the right information for my business partners that they got it. The more I can take that, upload it in with a spreadsheet or something along those lines, the more powerful it is. The more I have to get 4 IT folks who can go in and create a data mapping and map all the data out becomes more complex. And sometimes that's the right answer. But starting from the frame of reference that I want it simple is really powerful when it comes to scalable.
Yeah, totally agree with Jeff's point of view on that. Because it's easy to overcomplicate these businesses. It's almost like you're taking rocket scientists and dropping them into a pet store, and they all immediately want to make really cool aquariums, and all you really need is a good filter pump and salt water. Right. Don't lose sight of that, right? Yeah. And that's where the iterative process that you said and the agileness has to come into play. You almost have to say, what do I need today to operate the business effectively and maybe a little better than it was? And then as you scale up, there's always the opportunity to add more resources and get more complicated as it benefits the business, right? But I think sometimes people out of the gate are like, yeah, let's go add 5 developers. And it's like, well, what do you need? You need 4 KPIs. Do you really need 5 full-time developers to try to get to 4 KPIs? No. Right. So really understand your problem statement, to Jeff's point, and be more conservative up front in your approach.
And sometimes it's actually hard in the PE world to be more conservative up front because, and you'll probably back me up on this one, Gyner, but you often will get the deal team will say, oh, you need to invest, go ahead and invest in this, and don't, make sure you do the, if you need another body, go get it, go get another body, and you can spend the money on that. And the reality was, no, I don't want to spend the money on that. It's going to complicate it, and it's go against my EBITDA. And it's hard when you got really smart guys who are telling you go spend the money on more to do it more complex.
Yeah, I think sometimes we lose sight of the fact that it's not the one body that's the problem. Usually, if it's hey, I just need to add 1 person, it's not an issue. But 1 becomes 2 becomes 10, right? And then in 6 months, you're looking at your trailing 12 months EBITDA. I didn't want to use the acronym there, Jeff.
I know.
You're trailing 12 months. You're like, oh my God, what happened? My SG&A just went up by $2 million. Well, you added a person in January. You added 2 people in February. You added another one in March, and a half of one in May, and 3 people in June. And all of a sudden, you just blew up your P&L by almost by accident. You didn't mean to, right?
Right.
But all of these things individually aren't a problem, but in total are a real problem, right?
Hmm.
So it's always, I like Jeff, the way Jeff said that. Maybe add one, see how it works for a few months, see if you're getting to where you need to go to, and then make a decision on whether or not you need more.
Yeah, and then trying to level it is also something to be very thoughtful of, because it's very easy to, I want to say, over level a role early. And you bring someone who's used to leading an organization, because let's use HR as an example. I need to bring a strong HR leader in. So
Hmm.
what you've really done is brought in a person who's run a team of HR folks. So when they come in, the last thing they want to do is, be hand jamming in the payroll or the benefits. They want to hire someone to hand jam in the payroll
Right.
and the benefits. And they want to be strategic. So now you brought an expensive resource in who the first thing they do is say, I need to hire another resource. And you had nobody to start with, and all of a sudden you've got a lot of costs that just went out the door. And it's the cumulative impact on it, because you can always argue one more body, and you can always argue that one body doesn't matter, but 10 do.
Hmm. So then, how important does the FP&A role play in ensuring that these expenses are not creeping up on you, and you're a little bit more predictive, or can you really be predictive, or are you just taking things as they come? What's that balance? How far
I
in the future can you really see, and the accuracy of that?
So I personally think you can be very predictive.
Hmm.
Uh, but you have to get out of this is back into understanding the organization and what drives it in the people.
Yep.
Hmm.
So, and this is where FP&A can help, but it's got to be this is where FP&A goes from a science to an art.
Hmm.
Part of FP&A is telling me what happened. Tell me, my either my expenses are up, or maybe my revenue is up, or my profits are up or they're down. Tell me what happened.
Hmm.
Now, with that piece of information, let's go talk to the operations guys, the sales guys, and figure out how we leverage the good things that are happening, and how do we minimize the bad things that are happening. What needed to happen, what doesn't need to happen, where do we need to course correct? And then with that, you can actually start to become predictive. You can say, I can see where the revenue will continue. We've decided that this particular market segment has got X amount of folks in the pipeline that are at the 70% level. This is going to convert, and we are going to get that sales. Do I have the right level of people to execute on it? No, I'm going to need more bodies to execute. How many bodies am I going to need? FP&A person can probably help me in conjunction with the operations guys, understanding the differences between, is it just an average person, or is it someone we just hired?
Hmm.
One of the things we spend a lot of time on here organizationally is uh, we have a lot of, I'll call them applied programmers, and they're
Applied what?
applied programmers. They're absolutely
Okay.
critical to the organization.
Yeah.
They're not people in the back office. These are guys actually doing the work for us.
Mm.
But growing them into really successful takes 6 years. So how do we be thoughtful? Yeah, exactly. So if I'm growing and I'm, adding more sales, I can't just bring in a guy who's this experienced 6-year person. So if I really want to grow, I've got to be really thoughtful about my people pipeline to go with it.
Mm.
Again, that's where I think, and that might mean that I need to do things less efficiently, because I need to spread my experienced guys more thinly, and using them in more of I'm going to call it supervisory capacity. I'm simplifying the process, but and use less experienced ones in a more robust way. That's going to cost you more. And so,
Mm.
yes, you can be predictive, but you've got to be thinking about all the different drivers and how they relate to each other. And that's where that combination between art, really understanding the business, really working with your business partners, sales, operations, whatever it happens to be, and then science with being able to, put those into a model and drive them and react to what you see from, prior month or the prior few months, can be very important.
And how do you align? So I get the data side and integrating that into your model and be able to become a lot more predictive and looking at what happened, what's happening, what's going to happen, and But how do you then get on the same page? At least let's talk just, to focus the conversation on the finance organization. So how do you align your AR process? Yeah, you can easily do that with 1, 2, 3 acquisitions, but once you get to 10, 15, like, is there like a cadence? How do you align the people? How do you align the process? How do you even think about it?
Well, you talk about two things there, because FP&A and AR are different.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
So
you've got AP, so how do you align all of these processes as you start, like you talk about scalable infrastructure? So what does that look like, not just from a data side, but from a people side? How do you set up your cadences? So do you have a weekly, monthly, quarterly planning cadences? How do you even start thinking about all of that?
Yeah, I think, hey Jeff, maybe I'll start and you
yes,
can fill in the blanks. The way I think about that, for the first step is to decide what's going to be like central to the new
Okay.
platform you're building, and what's
Yes.
going to remain in the businesses that you're buying,
Okay. Okay.
right? And then the scale answer is an output of that problem statement, right?
Hmm.
So once I know that I'm centralizing cash collections, AR, right?
Hmm.
Then I know I can scale it in Jeff's office there in Dallas or offshore or some combination thereof. But if I decide a different answer, which is, hey, I'm going to let all the businesses that I buy do their collections because there's some nuance in terms of the business itself that requires them to do the collections,
Hmm.
then the scale answer is different, right?
Hmm.
So for at least that's my view, Jeff. I mean, I'll defer
actually,
to you.
and that's exactly it's very near and dear to me right now because we're working through exactly that. And there were some
Hmm.
processes like accounts payable. We said we can bring that all into one place because we can scale it in one location, one place, and that's a good one. Our processes and controls can be very tight. But then on the billing and on the collection side, we said we can't do that. Way too nuanced. There's way too much of a customer back and forth. There's way too much integration, to use probably a poor word, but maybe involvement with the operations and sales guys in the different local areas. And she said, well, those have to be out where the field are. Now, once you do that, that doesn't mean you kind of let it completely go. Now you go into how do I layer over guardrails and how wide do my
Yes.
guardrails need to be? So,
Hmm.
and that could be everything from, don't go outside the bounds on the left and the right, all the way down to I still want you to follow certain processes, whether it's well, I'll use like collections. Here's the collections process. I want you to reporting process. I want you to monthly we're going to talk about everybody over 90 days, or here's the
Hmm.
process to contact everybody on this cadence, and you work through a process that may be a lot more loose than, say, the centralized process, but it's more consistent across the organization.
So you standardize the process, but you keep the people decentralized, and the driver, what's influencing that decision is how much do you need to know about the customer to perform the process properly. Does that require deep knowledge of the customer and close interaction and understanding the nuances of the business? And that's how you make the decision whether it's central or decentralized. But in your case, Jeff, you're saying AP, it's probably standard across all the businesses we're going to acquire, so we can put it in one place. But billing, it requires a lot of back and forth with the customer, so we'll keep it decentralized, but we'll still standardize the process. Probably you're putting them all on one system. I'm assuming the same billing system, or are you also keeping that decentralized?
Eventually, I mean, well, I guess that depends on the companies you're in and where you're going to, because now you're getting into a much more robust question on um, scalability and interoperability of accounting systems, and that's probably a whole podcast you could do that you would bore people
Yeah,
to
yeah,
do.
for sure. I, I,
But what I would say is, because I think I thought Gyner said it well, is you're looking, is there something unique that I need to have them close to the location or close to the customer or close to the operations? And then when it comes to, and if the answer is they need to be, then when it comes to process, I'm always nervous about the term process because that can mean anything from very hyper detailed. You move your pencil 2 inches to the left every day at 3 o'clock, and you move it to the right every day at 4 o'clock. To I want you to make sure you show up today at 8 and leave at 5. I mean, those are very different levels of process, and picking the right level of guardrails or process is important because it depends on how much flexibility is needed to get the success you want out of the function you're after, because you want the function to be successful. Because that's the thing that a lot of people forget is, in the end, whether it's the back office or whether it's the front office, is all about delivering great customer service and great product. And if I can't do that, and that, if I'm even in the back office, in the end, that's what we have. We may not see the customer, but if what we're doing doesn't actually in the end help us to do that, then we probably shouldn't be doing it.
Yeah. Hey, Jeff, one thing on that, where I do see some process needed in these businesses, I want you to react to this statement, maybe give a thought. In the acquisition world of private equity, we are typically buying businesses that are cash-based accounting. And when I say cash-based accounting, you got an owner, owns a very entrepreneurial business, usually has some level of QuickBooks implementation there. And really, their measure of success is how much money am I putting away in the bank, right? And if there's enough money in my bank account, I'm doing something right here. I don't necessarily need a process, right? But when they move to our world, they go into what we'll call, and maybe this is not the right term, but accrual-based accounting, right? Now you need a process. Now cash is king on collections, right? You can't wait an extra 30 days for somebody to pay you, because guess what? It might cost us more money to go borrow in order to make payroll the next week, right? Because we'd have to go borrow from a bank and then pay interest on that, right? So do you see the need for process a little bit in that transition? Like, hey, there's a little bit of an educational process that has to happen once we acquire some of these businesses.
Oh, absolutely. It's you say that in the first 6 months, I spent a lot of time, and it was cascading, spent time with the senior leaders down to the rest of the leadership, trying to better understand what success looked like. In my particular business, they always looked at it and said, cash in the account, and did I bill them? And did I get my cash? And that was good. And I was like, well, those are good. And it was an interesting nuance, because when I was trying to train them that actually revenue, and I'm calculating it differently, and here's how I do that, is important. They were like, oh, so I don't have to worry about billing and cash. Nope, wait, hang on. No, those are important too. So we need to layer both these on, and here's the process. And then to Gyner's point on that, almost every business I've been in that has been in the bought into the PE world, as the finance guy, one of the first things you do is just put number of days in the close process. Before that, all the owner really said is looked at his bank account any given day and said, yeah, I'm doing good.
Yeah.
And the first thing we have to do is, well, on day 2, you need to make sure all of your AP is done. On day 3, all your billing is done. On day 5, I've got my revenue numbers closed out. On day 6, I'm doing the reporting. On day 8, we're done and dusted, and we're off to the next month. That is a really hard transition for so many organizations. Very hard. And then even getting them to understand, well, but I found this on day 8. Well, that's going to be a problem then, isn't it? That's going to have to go to the next month. And that whole change of process, because changing a process is everybody has a process today. It may not be documented, and it may not be consistent, and it may not be consistent with each other, but they all have a process, which means when you put, I'm going to say, a little bit more professional of a process in place, it's hard, because change is hard.
There are so many threads we can pull from this, and like you said, we can probably fill in the next few episodes just discussing the process challenges. But I want to end with this question, Jeff. If you were to go back and talk to Jeff, the CFO, first-time CFO at a private equity platform, his first stint, what advice would you give old Jeff?
I want to hear this one. This is a good question.
That's a really good question. Gyner probably recognizes this in me. I would say to be even more humble. I mean,
Mm.
I mean, regularly my MO is I do go in, I'm a good question asker. But I also kind of, especially my younger Jeff, knew the answer he wanted to hear when he asked. And I think older Jeff would say, yeah, you may not be as smart as you think. Go ahead and listen a little bit deeper and assume that the person talking to you knows they've been successful for a reason. Find out why they've been successful and now help see where you can help apply things. I'd be more
Yeah.
humble.
What would your advice be to a first-time CFO at a private equity platform?
I think what Jeff said is right, which is, really spend the time to understand. For first-time CFO, I think the other thing that's important is maybe cool your jets a little bit on your ambition,
Mm.
right?
Oh yeah.
That comes into play, and you're stepping into something that's rather complicated because, like, the accounting aside, right, the finance piece of it is complicated, but you layer on the cultural pieces you're having to kind of deal with on top of that. You got to cool your jets a little bit and be willing to, like, not project your answer onto people and really understand the business a little bit. I think it's what Jeff said is dead on, right, for a newer CFO. The way I equate it is, it's interesting, is young people. I live in the north, right? And if you walk around Chicago in the winter, you always see the younger people with, like, no heavy coats on, a light jacket, or maybe short sleeve shirts. And you always see the older people wearing a coat, right? At some point in between those two things, you have an epiphany that, man, it's really cold and I get sick. So I should probably wear a coat. Now, the scientists will kill me. They'll say weather has nothing to do with you getting sick or not getting sick. But what I would say is it takes you a week to get. That's a science question. My point there being, like, just take the opportunity to understand more, because the older version of you is going to do that because they're going to learn it the hard way, right? So if you're new, step back a little, take a few breaths, and ask more questions.
I love it. I listened to this podcast twice because we had some amazing insights we pulled out of Jeff and Gyner here, and I'm grateful to have this opportunity to tap into your wisdom and amazing experience. So there you have it, folks. Amazing insights from a 3-time CFO. On what it takes to be successful at getting a new platform acquisition ready. What do you do in the first 90 days? What do you do pre-acquisition? What do you do post-acquisition? How do you think about the culture? How do you think about the integration? And a lot more insights. And if you're enjoying these episodes, I want to invite you to an upcoming M&A Roundtable. Gyner and I will be doing it live. Where myself, Gyner, and other experts in the field will be talking about all the different problems, opportunities, solutions that happen during an M&A, and it's a peer-to-peer conversation that we're going to have. So if you would like to join us, leave a comment below, reach out to me, and I'd be happy to extend an invite. And that's all. And once again, thank you, Jeff and Gyner, so much for your insights. And until next time, make your days great.
Great.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.